Mike Schmidt, two-part question. Take us through what you're reporting. And two, are they contemplating perjury charges for Mr. Nauta?
Well, the significance of our reporting is basically to show that the Justice Department is trying to push recalcitrant witnesses to cooperate with the investigation. They're trying to find out as much as they can about what was going on behind closed doors as Trump was trying to fend off these requests from the government and moving boxes and going through boxes at Mar-a-Lago. What was it that Trump's intentions were and why was he doing that? And it's not just on this aid that they're doing that. They're also pushing Kash Patel, a former Devin Nunes aide who worked in the Trump administration, at one point was going to become a senior FBI official, but even Bill Barr didn't want that to happen. He thought that having him there was problematic. The government wants him to testify. He went before a grand jury within the past month. He took the Fifth Amendment several times in response to questions. The government has moved to compel his testimony to get him to answer questions. His lawyers are fighting it, saying that he should be able to invoke his Fifth Amendment rights. So the government really putting the squeeze on witnesses as they try to get to the bottom of what Trump's true intentions were with trying to conceal these materials.
Mike, I just want to read part of your reporting. It says investigators have interviewed Mr. Nauta at least twice and are skeptical that he was frank with them about his role in moving the boxes. The authorities did not show him the video footage during the interviews, according to two people. But at one point, he gave an answer that investigators found contradictory to one he had provided earlier. In a later interview, Mr. Nauta said he had taken boxes to Trump's residence at Mar-a-Lago. One person briefed on that interview said he was clear with investigators that Trump had directed him to do so, while another said he was less specific about who had told him to do so. Some echoes to the second volume of the Mueller report, where Trump was asking people to fire Mueller and whatnot. This is obviously a former military chef and valet, someone who would be very impressionable, but it's also clear that what they have against him is his own actions on the surveillance footage. And we know that DOJ has invoked the surveillance footage and subpoenaed additional surveillance footage. Can you talk about the strength of the evidence that they have on that footage?
Well, what they have is evidence on the footage that contradicts the initial statements he gave them. And what that gives the government is leverage over him. The government would probably, I'm pretty sure, Andrew Weissman could give us a better sense on this, but wants to know what he knows much more than trying to make a perjury case against him and trying to prosecute him for misleading investigators. They're trying to understand what Trump was really up to, and the cooperation of an aide who moved the boxes is integral to that. So they want that testimony. They want that cooperation to understand everything that was happening. And indicting him and taking him to court is probably not the direction where they want to spend their time and energy on this investigation.
Andrew Weissman, your name has been invoked. Your thoughts about what Mike's reporting. And I'm going to ask a question I've asked a ton of times. Why not charge the obstruction case? It's clear they have at least Mr. Nauta obstructing this investigation.
So there are two potential charges. There's obstruction of the investigation, and there's making a false statement to a government official. The FBI and the Department of Justice lawyers both qualify as government officials for the purposes of that statute. Of course, if they've also testified in the grand jury, they could be subject to perjury charges. I agree with Mike that the ultimate goal is to get the truthful testimony of Mr. Nauta and Mr. Patel. It is complicated, though, when you're dealing with people like this to just say, oh, you told something that's false, but now if you say something true, we won't charge you or we'll immunize you and we'll let bygones be bygones. There's a real value to, if you can, making those false statement, obstruction, perjury cases, what were derisively referred to by former President Trump as process crimes. And the reason is, as Frank well knows, is that it is very important, if you're trying to encourage people to be candid and truthful, that you make it clear that there are consequences if you come in and lie to the government. And the way you do that is by charging people. So if they have a very strong obstruction or false statement or perjury case, one thing to do is to say, look, we will, you need to plead guilty, but we will give you a cooperation agreement. We will bring your cooperation to the attention of the sentencing judge. And there's a way out of this where you may not face jail time, but there are going to be consequences for the fact that you committed a crime. That is sort of the ideal way of going forward. But that presupposes that you have a strong case and that you really can wait and they will ultimately provide that truthful testimony. The other way is to simply immunize them and confer immunity, which is a whole long process, but it also has upsides and downsides.
Frank, the story has so many layers of sort of a quintessential Trump story where he corrupts, a military chef and valet, brings him to Mar-a-Lago with him after government service. And he's now at the beating heart of the criminal investigation into the mishandling of national defense documents, and it sounds like they have him dead to rights on criminal obstruction of that probe. What do you make of sort of the larger picture that's emerging from DOJ's criminal investigation into the documents at Mar-a-Lago?
Yeah, we can learn a lot from this about what the influence Trump has on those around him, and none of it's good influence, as you've said. But it's a lesson for all of us here. Yes, this young man or older man served his country in the United States Navy, had the honor of serving at the White House, and then decides, whether it's a retirement or a resignation. Let's say he retires. He did his 20 years. And he goes to Mar-a-Lago, don't know the salary, doesn't really matter. It just means that he had this connection to Trump, and breaking through that for the agents and attorneys who are interviewing him is so critical to the obstruction charge. And one of the ways I would do this, and Mike's reporting is giving us real insight into an investigative strategy. For example, you never, as an investigator, want to show your whole hand. So we learned from the reporting that they talked with him without showing him the security camera evidence, right? You want to do that because you want to see where he's going with this. You don't want to show your hand. But then after he says something inconsistent with what's clearly on the video, then they lay it down for him. So that's an aha moment, should be a wake-up call for him. What I would do is really focus on the psychological component of getting him to cooperate, which is your legacy can be the guy who went down with Trump, the obstructor, the guy who moved the boxes, or your legacy can be the guy who did the right thing, served his country, and continued to do so even after retiring. I would even consider playing clips of Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony and all the other higher-ranking officials who did the right thing, even though they were initially loyal to Trump. Even perhaps go so far as to thinking about presenting an FBI agent who served in the Navy. There are plenty of them. Getting that agent to say, look, I was where you were, but we need you to do the right thing.